Hey, folks, welcome to The Peaceful Way, where we work towards a less violent and more peaceful world. I'm here with the great David Gornoski and his sultry baritone voice, and he is here to discuss. We're going to talk about quite a few things, but actually, first of all, I just want to say David introduced me to some of the ideas of Rene Girard that I actually had never heard before. A couple of years ago, I heard him on a podcast. So I'm sort of like indebted to him for some of my intellectual development on these ideas, and just understanding the world. In this episode, we're gonna sort of talk about a lot of current events in a through a mimetic lens or a Girardian lens. And if you're not super familiar with Rene Girard or his ideas, I would recommend going to one of my first episodes. I do kind of a primer. And David also has a podcast called Things Hidden. And he does a really good job of sort of elaborating on the world in sort of that Girardian understanding. And if you go to his really early, is it your first episode, David? You kind of have like a primer on Girard.
Yeah, I kind of dive in feet, first in with the talking about the betrayal of Jesus and what was happening on the Passion Night. But yeah, it's kind of designed to be a kind of an introduction where you
Yeah,
just dive in and go into it.
yeah, for sure. Yeah, so I would say if anyone's sort of like unfamiliar with this, go back and listen to some primers. There's even some great YouTube videos just so you can understand the concepts that we're sort of talking about, and kind of follow us on that. And on that note, David, where else can just before we get into this, where can people reach you, and what other platforms are you on? Just plug all your
Is it,
stuff.
by the way, is this going to be video on YouTube too,
Um, I'm not sure
or
yet.
audio? Yeah,
On the audio for sure. We'll see
yeah.
about YouTube.
Well, I'm on YouTube, David Gornoski, if you want to subscribe to my work there. And then I have a radio program on FM and AM stations, self-syndicating that city by city across America. The program on radio is called A Neighbours Choice, and that's kind of the overarching name of my media group, A Neighbours Choice.
Okay.
My website's aneighbourschoice.com. Then the podcast is called Things Hidden, which is more of a deeper dive into anthropology and history. But both of those programs, you can find them on my podcast. Just search for the word David Gornoski, that name, and you'll find it on most all the major platforms. Jordan, you've been one of the folks encouraging me to post more of my radio shows on the podcast platform too. So
Yeah,
thanks
yeah.
for encouraging me to, because a lot of those episodes I did only on radio, and I started off doing a podcast only. Then I did radio, got into broadcast radio, and then I've trying to digitally integrate everything back into a seamless picture again.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and again, I think your radio show is great, and also your podcast, and I highly recommend people go over and check that out, and even follow David on social media. He always has great little thoughts that he posts about current events and stuff. So I
But I'm
highly
not active on Twitter. I do have a lurker account, but I just
okay.
find Twitter to be a disgusting cesspool.
Yeah, we'll get into Twitter. We'll talk about Twitter as well. It's a rough place out there, that Twitter world, the Twitterverse. Um,
My problem is I don't like the idea of leveraging your media voice to a bunch of people who hate truth on every level that truth, works in,
for sure, for sure. Yeah, I hear you.
It's not a good business strategy from my perspective.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I do.
This is water. This is water, folks. I'm not drinking a giant beer on the show.
um, uh, yeah, Twitter can definitely be a cesspool. and Facebook, I mean, Facebook has its own problems, but at least you get a bit of a wider array of discussion there, and a little bit less of the groupthink. You kind of get a much more diverse field of opinions. So it's not that there isn't the kind of mobbing that happens on Twitter, but it is a little, at least it's tolerable, if that makes sense. So
Yeah, it's a little more personal touch on
yeah,
Facebook.
yeah. And you can actually have like discussions as well, whereas Twitter, you're kind of limited with what you can actually say.
I'm just amazed at how these people in Silicon Valley that moderate the content on both Facebook and Twitter and all these platforms, YouTube, they can be wrong on everything that is possible to be wrong about. They're wrong about nutrition science. They're wrong about physics. They're wrong about politics. They're wrong about economics. They're wrong about world affairs. They're wrong about ethics. They're wrong about religion. I mean, how many times can you be wrong on everything that matters, and not only be wrong about it, but be viciously censorious or
Yeah, yeah,
censorious or whatever about
sure.
anybody who deviates from their stupid wrong think? It's
Yeah.
absolutely amazing.
It is amazing. It's amazing, and they're very incentivized to continue being wrong, because there's a reality that they sort of wish uh, was the case, and then there's real reality, and they keep trying to create this unreality. And in order to do that, for the people who are free thinkers and critical thinkers, you have to sort of push everyone outside who doesn't go along with the unreality. So it creates a really kind of sick system, if you will, on
Right.
how on intellectual development and thought. But yeah, and on that note, let's get right into it. So I wanted to ask you a few things, and uh, one of the things I wanted to. You're a guy in media. You do terrestrial radio and podcasting, and you also write for a number of publications. So what is like your view on the current state of media? And this isn't to say all media, but the let's say even 75% of it, where it just seems to me to be giving us incorrect, false information, or they're very, very slow to get the right information, and they're very, very quick to give the wrong information. What do you think is like causing this? And is there like some sort of phenomenon that I'm not catching here? Because it really seems, and I even go back to like say the Iraq War and weapons of mass destruction, right, and things like that, where the media was so unbelievably wrong. And even I was like a teenager when that was all happening, and even I could like I started to pick up the inconsistencies, how the story would change, and uh, nobody would talk about how the story would change. And one minute the media is like loving George W. Bush for his actions, and then a few months later, they're all slamming him when it comes election time, right? So, uh, what is your perspective on this sort of like uh, what they're doing, how they're misrepresenting information? Do you think there's like a reason why they're doing that?
Well, the media, first of all, in the true sense, is just what human beings are. We are media. We are mediators, right? So we
Right.
mediate between other people. Every one of us is a part of the media, whether we like it or not. Every time you do something, that communicates something to another human, whether nonverbal or verbal, you are a part of media. You're mediating reality for somebody else. So that's the first step, is that there's no special class of media. Now, over history, there is, a scribal, class or caste that takes it upon itself to be the sacred bearers of the truth for the priests, the high priests of a society. The high priests are basically, there's no distinction in much of history between religion and politics. So the high priests are also intertwined with the high chief, and those high priests are the ones who occupy the positions of power in society and government and its crony organizations that are allied with it. And those high priests are the ones who are in charge of keeping society unified, pacified, united,
Right.
and in a state of order. And the way they do that is by sacrificial violence, by using their monopoly on the use of initiatory violence, or aggressive violence. They are the ones who have the exclusive claim to mediating violence and vengeance, for that matter. And when they do employ those methods, it's up to the so-called media class to interpret their divine kind of uh, decisions
Yeah.
to the population. And so we've created a situation where we believe that there's a media out there, and we're not media, but because of technology radically decentralizing that power, because everybody has access to HD equipped smartphones and high speed internet, cellular or Wi Fi or what have you. And everyone has access to social media platforms, and you can live stream a police altercation with a peaceful person, or you can live stream a corrupt politician, or audio record their microphone saying something evil, or you can videotape anything anywhere around the world. That power is going to continue to melt away back into the hands of the population for good or ill. There's a lot of ill with that, but there's also a lot of good potential if those who are talented and who are morally grounded in ethics and beauty and personhood, if those folks step up to the plate and actually become the adults in the room that shape the media conversation in the direction towards peace, then you can
Yeah.
have a chance at changing the dynamic.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, that's a very good way of putting it. Is they're almost behaving as a priestly caste who is they're sort of the, like you said, the mediators between the people and the gods, and they get to decide what the right course of action is and what the truth is, and anyone who deviates from that is
But
sort of.
notice that whatever media it is, they're always usually in favor of more and more authoritarianism and violence.
Yes.
So, Dr. Fauci was saying recently that, maybe we'll have to have papers showing that we're immune to the virus,
Yeah.
even though he doesn't know whether we can get reinfected or not. They don't even know, but they
Yeah.
float these things out, and the media glorifies Fauci as, oh my goodness, what an
Right.
amazing God, what a hero,
Yeah.
I saw someone, actually, it's hilarious. I saw people who were actually well versed in Rene Girard's work compare Dr. Fauci to Mother Teresa. So, I mean, that shows you that it's not
Yeah.
about an
Yeah.
intellectual thing. You can get the intellectual stuff all day
Yeah.
long, I guess. I don't even think they got that, but
Yeah.
assuming they did, and still totally miss the power of the mimetic spell of sacred institutions like government, holy men and women. So
Totally.
that's what we're dealing with. This is the thing that we have to understand. We have not left religion. We never left religion. We're
Yes.
so thoroughly in religion, and the only
Totally.
way people can learn to navigate these waters is to understand how religiously grounded all the institutions that manage their lives or try to are.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a great point. And just for anyone who maybe is living out in the woods right now, Dr. Fauci is he's like the chief health officer or something in the U.S. for the U.S. government. And he's been kind of the guy giving a lot of updates on the current situation in the U.S. But just the same in Canada, we have our chief medical officer. Her name is Dr. Teresa Lamb, and she's just been unbelievably horrible on this, like from the very get-go. uh, when people were suggesting, well, maybe we should restrict uh, uh, airplanes from coming from China back in January, she was calling this racist, and you're gonna start widespread discrimination, and all that kind of stuff. And she's been wrong on almost every step of the way, or like way behind. And our media class and our state funded media propaganda machine, the CBC, has done nothing but praise her. And it seems to me that like these people will almost kind of get off scot free, and the rest of us are going to suffer the consequences from their poor decision making.
Well, and you look at the original office of a scapegoat king. Girard points out that the scapegoats are where the office of the monarch originated from. The idea that
Right.
you would lift up somebody and give them all the finest pleasures of the society, and then parade them around as a king before you sacrifice them to the gods. The gods in this case were actually just a psychological transference of the collective and their passion, that
Yeah.
people imagine and kind of hallucinate that it's something outside of their own camp that's telling them that sacrifice must be done to avert their wrath. In reality, it's the wrath of the crowd that's
Yes.
trying to be averted, but the crowd doesn't want to see what the crowd really is doing. And so they project their guilt, they project their anger and wrath and troubles into the sky to justify that transcendent feeling they feel when they're all united as one against a villain or a evil person who's destroyed their society, like Donald Trump, right? Of course,
Yeah.
that's what a lot of, like, millions of people who hate Donald Trump just said yes, absolutely, destroy him, right? They
Yeah.
don't even,
Yeah.
and they think they're secular. They think they went to college education, and they think that they're somehow beyond a primitive society that
Right.
listens to the gods demanding sacrifice. But regardless, and then it's so silly that they think that if you say that Trump or China or whoever is a scapegoat, therefore that means that you like those people. Like, oh,
Right. Right.
I'm a big advocate of the Communist Party if I say that they're your scapegoat, or I'm a big advocate of Trump if I say, yeah, Trump's your scapegoat. Like
Yeah.
there's this massive mimetic desire for uh, unity and transcendence on the back of someone else. And
Yes.
the way you scapegoat is to not know that you have a scapegoat. It's to believe that they truly are deserving of all judgment, wrath, and condemnation and hate. And that if you
Right.
could expunge them from society, punish them, destroy them, take them down a notch, humiliate them, imprison them, expel them, whatever, then you're going to create a release and a peace and a unity that will pass all understanding. And that's the thing that human beings are hungering for in times of crisis or unknown threats that come about.
Yeah. And do you think that and like you just said, I think that's a good point, is the unknown is people are very, very scared. They don't Information is coming at them at 1,000 miles per hour, and there's always conflicting information as well as and this goes back to even just before current events. Like it seems like in any war situation there is sort of this deluge of information, and then we sort of go to the experts and say, well, the experts say this, and then you're the waters are sort of really muddied. The well is poisoned, right? So you kind
Right.
of almost have to just rely on what the experts, or let's call them the priestly caste,
Right.
what they are telling us. And do you think that there is sort of a dynamic here where people are taking advantage of the misinformation or the wrong information, and they're sort of using that as kind of a way to take power or to grab hold of power?
Well, they don't know what they're doing. There's someone in society that told us that too, right? 2,000 years ago. So
Yeah.
they don't know what they're doing. So they have there's a relationship. That's something I've been writing about recently, is the idea that there's a relationship between trust the experts and then the hidden violence that goes about. That's a continuum. They're connected. That idea, that trope of trust the institutional experts no matter what they say, just cling to their every word. And then that faith that people are supposed to have for those folks, that has this double side to it. The other side of the coin is they get that faith and that trust for the experts because there's a hidden coercion that's sacrificially keeping folks down who violate that sacred power of the experts. Does that
Yeah.
make sense?
Yeah, I
So
think I think I'm getting what you're saying. Go ahead.
so I'm going to try to give you an example of it. So you have like uh, the experts of the FDA and Dr. Fauci's group and all this stuff. They'll say, you know, we need a vaccine. We don't, when Trump said hydroxychloroquine and azithromycin could be game changers that doctors need to look into because other doctors were using these two things and apparently getting pretty good results around the country, around the world.
Right.
And so, and still apparently are, right? And so he said, do that. And that was a violation of the sacred order of things.
Right. Because
Because
the experts didn't give them permission to do that.
right. So he's the chief priest of the ship of the state, but his role is not to step out and be the medicine man.
Yeah, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
He's supposed to wait for the medicine man to come do their incantation and their ritual magic of fancy confirmation of all the different procedures of the bureaucracy having tested these drugs. And then they come out with a drug or a solution that's obviously patented, right?
Yeah,
Of course,
yeah.
it's got to be patented.
Yeah.
Their magical intellectual property right that they invoke, which allows them to make obscene profits for their crony friends and obscene job security and expansion for the bureaucracies that have to help subsidize or finance these so-called solutions. So they hate the idea. It's a total taboo for the high chief, Trump, head of this sacred state, to say, actually, no, these generic antibiotic drugs that are FDA cleared for safe, those might work. They're like, what are you doing? What are you doing? You're ruining the magic of statecraft. Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
You're not supposed to say that. You're off script. That's a generic. Okay. We don't want generics.
Right, right.
That generics are yesterday's news. That's why they're generics. You're not supposed to solve new problems that completely paralyze the world economy with things that cost a penny to make. You can't do that.
Yeah.
Doxycycline costs 5 to 10 cents a capsule. That's an antibiotic that I think and other people think could be helpful for preventative or treatment. The other one, azithromycin, that costs like 18 cents a capsule. And then, isn't it funny though, Jordan? Just kind of a deviation. Isn't it funny that the people who are for free markets, we're the ones told that we're all about profit, but we're the ones actually promoting things that cost 10 cents or 5 cents.
Right.
And then
yeah.
the idiots who say they're love, not hate people, those are the guys that want massive profit margin stacked, massive profit margins for their patented garbage drugs, right?
Yeah.
Isn't it amazing?
It is
it's
amazing.
Just upside down. The people who are for freedom, we're the ones trying to get the power of the people, the power of the poor. It's these dolts that worship the sacred violence of the state that want everybody sitting like ducks. By the way, not getting sunshine, which is integral to any basic understanding of the immune system, not getting fresh air, which is another vital thing for being humans, just sitting in the house and eating 7 to 11 servings of bagels a day, according to the stupid, fake pseudoscience of the USDA and their nutrition food pyramid. Okay.
Oh yeah.
So they want us stuck eating 7 to 11 grains a day, no sunshine hardly. You get arrested if you play Frisbee in the park. Wait a second. I thought those parks were for us. I thought those public servants just managed the people's parks so that, but then you get arrested if this guy in Colorado or whatever was playing Frisbee or T-ball with his little family.
Yeah.
Gets arrested,
Yeah.
So, this is the stupidity. It takes a willing suspension of disbelief, like you're watching a movie, which is what this is all about. You have to willingly suspend your disbelief to say, oh, these public servants, they really care about us. They, the parks, those are the people's parks.
Yeah, yeah.
Arrested for playing T-ball. Based on what? Based on the experts' particular theory that we can avoid more deaths by flattening the curve, even though that is a highly contested theory in academics.
It's definitely
It's a highly
dubious. Yeah.
contested theory.
Yeah,
The
it's a
idea
dubious
that
claim.
flattening the curve would actually cause less deaths. Some people, like what was that guy, Dr. Witowski he's retired from Rockefeller University.
Okay.
He's a epidemiologist, and he suggests that no, actually flattening the curve is going to be more likely to exacerbate multiple second waves of this virus potentially. It may actually cause more elderly folks to die from this disease than would otherwise. So
Yeah.
that's a hotly contested thing. But what the experts who have the monopoly power of the state, they say, no, we've picked a decision, we've picked a theory, and we're going to use sacred violence of the state to arrest and handcuff folks who play t-ball in the park. That's supposed to be their park. They paid for it. That's
Right.
what the stupid myth of the state is. That's the people's park. That's the people's roads.
Yeah, yeah.
It's everybody's until there's a novel theory
Yeah,
about a
yeah.
novel virus
Yeah.
that the state needs to say, that's it, we've decided, and we're going to use violence if you resist our decree from on high. But anyways, I wanted to just connect this idea of the expert. I mean, I'm kind of doing it here now, but the experts and the underclass that feed them. The underclass are the people playing frisbee, the people who can't start their business, have to shut their business down because of the state picking a controversial theory about how to stop the exacerbation of deaths for this virus. They picked a theory. We have to flatten the curve. And I'm not saying whether that theory is the right one or not. All I'm
Sure.
saying is they've chosen to side with a particular theory that just so happens to be more conducive for folks that want to have $1 trillion handouts to their friends. That's
Yeah.
nice. That's a nice side. But they choose that theory, and then they say the experts have decided you must stay inside with force applied if you don't. So now church is not an essential service, and walking a park or walking a lake is not allowed. You can get arrested or cited for that. You can't, run your business in certain states and cities. So there's a total dissolution of anything that was your God-given freedom, totally wiped off, because they feel that a one-size-fits-all approach, which is based on a contested theory about how to mitigate deaths in a pandemic, is the sacred way to go about. And what happens is, so you get underclass people being coercively subjugated because of the experts and their sacred faith, that the sacred faith that people place in them. Faith means trust.
Yeah.
Pistis, that's the Greek in the biblical text. Faith is trust, like a marriage trust, fidelity. How many millions of people have a fidelity, a trust to the so-called monopoly experts when they don't know? They may be gifted in some areas, but
Sure.
the idea that they could plan out 330 million people's reaction to a virus
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
not even, by the way, talk about sunshine, fresh air, and limiting your carbohydrate consumption.
Yeah. Yeah, just
They don't
doing
even talk
things
about
that are good for your immune system, things
They
like
don't
really
talk about
simple
that.
thing. Yeah. Yeah, and it is amazing to me because um our government, well, my government in particular, has been just taking the WHO's word on everything, and they were repeating the honestly, I don't know if it was gross incompetence or just straight up lies from the World Health Organization when they were saying just a few months ago that this virus cannot be transmitted human to human. And that was just, it was just a total falsehood. And our governments didn't do their due diligence. They didn't check into those claims themselves. They just took what the World Health Organization said and repeated them. And now we're in this situation, and and now we have to obey them and their dictates for whatever they say. And even just on the like, there's a small town by my city where there was a couple of teenagers. They were in a car together and they were parked, and they got a $1,200 ticket, each of them, and and it's like the police don't know if these kids like live together, what their relationship is, and like we can all like with a rational mind say like they probably know each other. The risk for them is extremely low for transmission, and they're probably not going around vulnerable people. They're just two friends hanging out. But we have to go in and make an example of them for the rest of society. Now, thankfully, their parents took this to the media, and the police department out there rescinded the tickets. uh, but it is this weird thing. And in Hamilton as well, in Ontario, they've been handing out tickets, $750 fines to homeless people who aren't social distancing. Like, how can anyone look at this and be okay with this? And I don't understand that, but it's a lot of it is the environment that's been created. There's this sort of mob rule that like we must do absolutely anything and everything to reduce this contagion, and doesn't matter what lengths we're going to go to, we have to do it. It doesn't matter, there's no cost benefit analysis. It's just this one size fits all approach to uh, keeping the contagion down. And it's funny because Girard in Violence and the Sacred talks about violence itself as a contagion, so while we're dealing with a literal virus, we're also having to deal with a contagion of violence where we think we can just stomp on homeless people and harmless kids. You know what I
Yeah,
mean?
and violently make everybody stay in their apartment or house.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
then millions of them, apparently, according to the media, are howling out at the windows every night like little puppies of the
Yeah,
state.
yeah,
In
yeah,
New York City, they're howling, oh, because this is what we've done. This is the grandeur of the modern sensibility and all of its luster and glory, is this howling out at the window because mommy and daddy state tells me I have to stay inside and get no sunshine, or get no proper nutrition, eat 7 to 11 grains servings of grains a day. Total nonsense stupidity. I'm
yeah,
telling
yeah,
you, we're going to look back real fast. I mean, I'm already looking at it, and millions of people are looking, but the rest of the world and history is going to judge this time very, very harshly
yeah, for
at the
sure.
stupidity of no concern for what the immune system is actually designed to do and how it's designed to function.
Yeah,
And the fact that they've looked at the acidic content, the level of acid in humans versus in ancient humans and Neanderthals compared to hyenas from that time. And our acid level in our stomach is higher, it's more acidic than hyenas. Now we
okay,
know what hyenas eat, it's meat.
yeah, yeah.
Why would we have a higher acidic level in our stomachs than even hyenas, if not for the fact that we're supposed to be eating primarily animals?
For sure.
Oh my goodness. The only reason why that's controversial is because you're Christianized and you don't know it.
Yeah,
The
yeah.
only reason why you're sensitive to me even saying, oh my goodness, how taboo that humans were designed to eat primarily animals, is because the haunting of the cross has so pricked our conscience for the concern of those who we deem to be vulnerable to
Right,
exploitation and oppression, including animals that humans were designed to eat, that we're so sensitive to that it's even taboo for me to point out the obvious truth that humans, although they're omnivore, are actually designed to eat primarily animals, and fatty animals, nose
right,
to tail, if possible, um, not a massive amount of plants and seed oils and nuts and that kind of garbage. That
right,
we could eat plants, but those plants are a secondary survival food that we eat when we don't have access to a herd of mastodons or what have you. Now, for me to say that sounds off topic, but it's not, because what I'm trying to show folks and what I do on my radio program every day in my articles is to point out that there's all this truth, there's all this knowledge right under our noses that we are not able to see clearly because we don't know how much of what we think is standard consensus is actually mimetic sacred nonsense.
Right, right,
So much of the institutions that we have that say this is the consensus on nutrition, this is the consensus on physics, this is how an atom works, this is how nuclear fusion is to be done, this is how anything immunity is to be thought about. All of these different fields are
right.
always, think about it in economics, right? Is Austrian school economics ever taught in any of the major economic institutions that pick, the top scholars of the priestly class for economics? Hell no.
No, no. Yeah,
Right? Neither, there's no monetary theorists that have an understanding of sound money and the idea of polycentric legal frameworks for mediating the best way to handle, money as a medium of exchange in a competing, floating market of currencies. They don't have any concept of that. That's not even an option. In the same token, that's the same way it is in institutions that we may not be as familiar with, like
sure.
physics
Yeah,
or nutrition or medicine. And so
right,
what I'm trying to get at is that we are in a dark ages, folk, because we think that so much of we trust in this enlightenment mythology that the experts have just thought about everything so better than we have, and that they in their infinite wisdom can map out one size fits all policies and medicines and so on. And all we have to do is just sit like little worker bees in our little field that we've picked, our little specialist knowledge. Don't question things, don't deviate, only get your knowledge from TED Talks and McDonald's crap like that, and just be happy with the crumbs that the institutional sacred experts give you from on high. And that's just not the way reality is.
right.
And the only way you can understand that, in my opinion, is to understand the personhood revolution of Jesus. So mythology, we talk about fake news, Jordan.
Yeah,
Mythology is fake news, right? It's
right.
the same thing.
Yeah,
So what we call fake news today is just a cheap vestige of mythology.
yeah,
Mythology is a cover-up for violence. It's a cover-up for a hierarchical structure of reality that ancient communities used to maintain order and a sense of peace through hidden sacrificial violence. Might makes right.
right,
And so fake news is just a modern vestige of it, that because Christianity has disrupted that monopoly vision of reality, that winners writes history reality, because Christianity is breaking that up into pieces. Now we call it fake news, where people can actually debate the news. They can actually debate the truth that the news says, rather than just accept one perspective like mythology did in history. Does that make sense?
yeah, totally. And I think that's a very good point. And with it is interesting to see to watch how like modern technology is sort of almost like you say, decentralizing things and demythifying things, because now you have competing voices that actually have some that can disrupt a little bit of the sort of accepted wisdom of the sages on high. So yeah, I'm wondering what your thoughts about so again, I speak a lot from like a Canadian perspective, but I'm wondering what your thoughts are on like what's interesting is I've seen a lot of articles coming out of our Canadian media trying to again do this thing saying that Russian bots and Russia is spreading disinformation about the coronavirus, and perhaps they are. Maybe they are. Maybe they aren't. I don't know. And there's been like, to me, like the real culprit is kind of the Chinese government, who's put us all in this kind of mess that we're in, with their covering up and their uh, just straight up lies about what was happening in China with the virus. But I'm seeing a lot more of this, and this is sort of a hangover from the whole Russia Gate conspiracy that was going on, particularly almost up until January when Trump's impeachment was finally finished. And I'm just wondering, like, what your thoughts are. Like, how can you just maybe extrapolate on how the media creates scapegoats out of
Yeah.
sort of nation states like that, and how they use it?
Well,
Go ahead.
and but you see that on the right too. The right is, I don't know. We don't know all the details about what happened with the communist China origins of this virus, right? So,
Fair enough. Yeah.
so I guess my question would be, would any other country act differently than that? Maybe not much different if it was the shoes were in the other, on the other
Yeah.
foot, right?
Yeah, for
So
sure.
who knows, right? I mean, maybe they'd be a little bit different, maybe a little worse, a little better. I don't know. But,
Yeah.
my judgment is I'm skeptical of any government that asserts a monopoly control on information and reality and uses violence to have its way. I'm very skeptical of anything. I think any person who's a Christian should be skeptical of all governments who pretend to be monopoly bearers of reality. So that's the first thing, I think. So whether it's communist China or America or whatever government we're dealing with, be very, very skeptical of their narrative of how things happened, right?
For sure.
Um,
But even with that being said, I do see like kind of a pivot of my government to try and pin the blame of like misinformation or coronavirus conspiracy theories and whatnot onto like the Russian government and
well,
Canada.
Russia is a better fit, right? Because think about it. There's two camps, right? Well, there's more than that, but let's make it simple. There's the leftist camp, which is the victimist camp, and then there's the right wing camp, which both of them worship, and I don't mean this in a pejorative, but both of them hold in awe the power of monopoly violence from the state.
Yeah, for sure.
And so I would actually say libertarianism does too, in a different way, but it's just a little more complicated to explain that. But for now, I would say that the left versus the right is interesting. The left is like think of this again. I'm going to interpret everything through a religious framework. So the left is like the fundamentalist wing of the worship of the state, right?
Yeah, yeah. Which
They're
is
the
kind of
big, they're the
ironic.
heart, yeah, they're the fire and brimstone
Yeah,
lovers of the state. Now the right, they're pretty close to it. They're very close, and sometimes they're just as fundamentalist. But there's a little bit more intuitive skepticism that runs just a little bit in the right that makes them a little bit more likely to be the ones to say, wait a second, Dr. Fauci, I don't know if you speak for everybody, or wait a second, maybe we don't need a one size fits all national shutdown in America. Maybe it should be more local or state, right? So they have a skepticism. And I think part of that is the right's, upbringing and the notion of original sin, right? This idea that humans are fallen gives them a little bit more wisdom.
sure.
Sometimes, not all.
Yeah,
They go to war for one stupid incident and they want to go off to war, and then they lose their
yeah,
minds. So they have some
yeah.
problems there, and obviously they have a skepticism. Anytime there's a police action that goes wrong, they typically knee jerk say, no, you just should have obeyed better, right? That's why
Right,
you're
right.
dead. So
Yeah,
they have a problem really big there. But by and large, in the right, there's a healthier conversation about skepticism towards state power, and so. But the interesting thing, with the left is they need a scapegoat too. They need a boogeyman. So who's better than Russia? Russia is primarily considered Caucasian, right? They're considered to be primarily Christian, right? They're considered to be ex-lovers of communism. I mean, goodness, that's a hell of a heresy right there alone. I mean,
yeah,
they're like an ex-lover to the left. The left used to love Russia as their heroes. I mean, the New York Times used to write
yeah.
glowing articles in the 70s in their newspaper talking about how wonderful the Soviet Union's view of women was and their view of universal pre-K, and we need to be more like them. And then Russia supposedly got rid of communism, and now the left is like a spurned ex-girlfriend. They're just like, I can't believe you walked out on me. I hate you now, right?
Mm.
And to
Yeah,
make matters worse,
I
you
never thought
embrace.
of it in that way.
Yeah,
That's an interesting
so
take
that's
on it.
why they're jealous. They're obsessed with Russia because in their mind, Russia has done the greatest slap in the face they could. They rejected their fake Christianity of communism, and they
Right.
returned to an older form of Christianity called Russian Orthodox faith, right?
Right.
What a horrible insult.
Yeah.
That's like the left, that's like, wait a second, you left me for that girl? How dare you, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
You left me for that? I'm
Yeah.
way better than that. And so they're outraged at Russia, and they're obsessed with Russia because of that. And so you combine that with the fact that Russia has a reputation of being politically incorrect about some social issues, right?
Sure. Yeah.
Gender roles, things like that. You've got a situation where they make a perfect out of Hollywood, and incidentally, they're always evil villains in Hollywood. That's nice.
Yeah.
But you make I guess they didn't used to be before they lost their love affair with communism. But now you've got a classic, perfect leftist scapegoat group where you can say, hey, they're Christian. They're primarily, apparent. They're not white, but, Caucasian. Yeah. They look Caucasian. That's the image people have. But Russia has all kinds of races. So that's nonsense. But the image of a Russian is a white person. And so in the victimist narrative where people are supposed to be guilty of what they look like, their skin color, that's a classic target for scapegoating. Their hatred of their alleged rejection of communism, their Christian social morals. No wonder those are the boogeymen that are touted by the fundamentalist media. So the left is the fundamentalist worshipers of the state. The right is right there close to them, but the right is more what I call classic scapegoating, right?
Okay, explain that.
So classic scapegoating is where you are more okay with singling out someone who looks like a minority or an other.
Right.
So China, right?
Totally.
America is not a majority Chinese country. So the right's a little bit more tempted to say, oh, yeah, I have no problem. Yeah, it's China. China's the problem.
Yeah.
See what I mean?
Yeah.
I'm not saying that's racially motivated or not. I'm just saying that's they're more okay with violating that taboo of the fundamentalist victimist ideology of the left. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And definitely go ahead.
Yeah, well, here's why I call the left fundamentalists. Because Christianity has so infected our consciousness in the West that in order for the state to keep sacrificing people, it has absorbed the language and the feelings of Christianity to justify its continuation of collective violence, right?
Yeah.
So the left is the fundamentalist hardcore of that. And so they're more in tune with the Christian concern for victims than the right is.
For sure.
So they're more sensitive to the fact that no. We're not going to say this is a Chinese virus because that might demonize the minority Chinese community in America.
Right.
They're concerned with singling out people who are a minority in America or the West that might, if we say that might lead them to be isolated, marginalized, humiliated, excluded, hurt, and so forth. Now, there's a legitimate thing there, right?
For sure.
There is a legitimate thing there that doesn't need to be totally dismissed out of hand. But what do they do in turn, right? They go and villainize Russia, and they don't even see the difference. They can't see it. We see it. We're Christians. If you're thinking like a Christian, you can see it obvious, right?
Yeah.
You don't scapegoat the group that the media says you can scapegoat, and you don't scapegoat the group that the media says you can't scapegoat. You don't scapegoat any group. That's what Christians do. We don't blame other people for our problems. We can recognize where wrongdoing is, right? And that's something that has to be clear here. To say the Chinese government screwed up is not scapegoating in and of itself, okay?
Sure.
So we got to be clear about that.
Yeah.
But what we're saying is, along those lines, there can be a tendency to take a legitimate criticism of, say, the Chinese government and then turn it more into a scapegoating feeling, right?
Right.
Where you're saying, stop eating bats and mocking people because they have that reputation. That's kind of the there's a little bit of scapegoating energy that can be there a little bit.
Definitely. I think that's true. And I think even, yeah, like you said, like you very well explained how Russia is a scapegoat of the left, but, and it's not just now. China has been a scapegoat of really Trump since he announced his running for president. Like he was very much saying that he was going to go after China and what he saw as unfair trade deals, and obviously he sort of ended the TPP, and has kind of been in this trade war with China for the last couple of years. And you do see a lot of conservatives just taking that line, taking that hook, line, and sinker, like, yeah, we have unfair trade with China, so we need to punish them and sort of almost sacrifice them, if you will. And then, and it can't possibly be that I just want, me personally wants to make a voluntary arrangement with somebody in China, with another
Right.
individual in China, and buy a product from them for agreed upon price. It can't just be that. It has to be, I'm this amalgamated in this like nationalistic whole, just like that person in China is. And then yeah, like for some reason that the conversation always goes there, and we can't like see things just on like a personal and individual level. Does that
But
make
again,
sense?
as Christians, here's the exciting thing that Christians can do. We can come in the midst of this, and if we have the imitation of Jesus in our mindset, we can navigate the nonsense, cut through the Pharisees, the Sadducees, and so forth, and find the truth, which is going to be paradoxical. So it's true that some of our trade deals have been rigged as managed trade deals. Ron
Right.
Paul was good about saying this back in 2007 in the primaries of Republican Party, and continuing into his 2012 run. Managed trade deals are rigged free trade. So there is a legitimate criticism in NAFTA and so forth and all these different trade deals. And it's true that certain crony corporations and organizations can rig the trade arrangements to, and not just the trade arrangements, but also the regulatory environment in certain countries to
Right.
find cheaper labor that they can exploit, that their little guys who are competing against them can't. So we can acknowledge that, right?
Yeah.
But here's where the interesting thing comes. Okay, so what's the answer? What do you do about it? Now, there's a growing movement on the right to say they don't know they're doing this, but if you can't beat them, join them. So I just find it interesting that some people on the right, in their fervor against China, are willing to have authoritarian state-managed capitalism even worse than we have now.
Right. Yeah.
So that's what Girard would call mimetic rivalry. You become obsessed with those that you want to be like. So my question is, if we're here in terms of prosperity and freedom and potential with what we have in our society, and China's there, why would we be stupid to imitate someone who wants to be like us? That's mimetic rivalry. That's obsession with the other,
Yeah.
right?
Right. Right.
So the more you desire to beat them, the more you become them. And sameness breeds more sameness and more
Right.
rivalry and more hatred. So if the conservative movement would even begin to broach proper anthropology, they'd realize that if they want to beat China, they need to do the opposite of what they're doing. They
Yeah.
need to
Yeah.
stop calling for more and more tariffs and more regulations to protect the American work. We need to get rid of regulations. We need to get rid of licensing laws and occupational licensing. We need to get rid of subsidies. We need to get rid of all this hidden inflationary tax, which destroys people's savings and their purchasing power. We need to get rid of regulations is the biggest one.
Yeah.
We need to it's so difficult to start a business,
Yeah.
and there's so many rules that you have to put in place if you want to have employees. And these rules are not meant to help the little guy. They're actually built by the bad guys, the big mega corporations. They're the ones that put those little rules in to again, watch how they do it. It's the same method. Because we're so haunted by Christianity, all regulations that we're supposed to have that China doesn't, those regulations we have, they were sold to us because of a concern for victims, as Christianity would give us,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
So the state and its regulatory power, they absorb that Christian concern for victims. And I'm not saying they're doing it in a malicious way. They may really truly believe they're helping victims. But then it always turns out to be more power for the crony class behind the scenes to use that concern for victims to make it more difficult for small businesses to create creative destruction.
Right.
You see what I mean?
Yeah.
Do
And
you know how expensive it is to start an airline business? Do you know how expensive it is to start a travel company? Do you know how
yeah,
many
totally.
regulations you have to pay for and mandated insurance and this thing and that thing you have to do?
Yeah.
And then we got to bail out the travel industry now. Why don't we just allow people to actually have a free market in travel? And
Yeah.
maybe some geniuses like Elon Musk, or even better, the real Tesla, people like those folks that are out there could come in and create the most amazing, disruptive, not necessarily disruptive, but creative and beautiful and efficient and
Yeah.
amazing travel companies and airline companies and, things that we can't even think of right now. But we're not allowed to let them happen because regulations, subsidies, and so forth are designed in a way that never allow the market to work.
Right.
So the answer when we're stuck in this thing where the globalist regulatory complex of managed trade deals has rigged the situation for the worker. The answer, you're stuck in the middle between some market forces and mostly government rigging, right? So what's the answer? Do you go this way and go more government regulations, more tariffs to try to balance out the problem? Or do you go this way and go the other way and say, wait, let's reverse the car. Let's get out of the mud pit. We're stuck in a mud pit. We're going to
Yeah.
reverse the car out of it to return to freedom, to empower the worker and the family here in America or everywhere.
Yeah, for sure. And I think what a lot of people, there's sort of like a misconception too when we allow businesses to fail, especially these huge businesses. It's not like all their assets and their property just disappears and ceases to exist. It's some entrepreneur or a group of entrepreneurs who are smart and savvy. They put together a group and buy up all those assets and run the company more efficiently, and they save for a rainy day and whatnot. And they plan for not having bailouts, right? But unfortunately, we have this system where people are buying their own stock, and they're not planning for a rainy day, and all of a sudden when things get hard, then they need the government. It's not really the government, it's the taxpayer to bail them out. So yeah, it's a completely unfair system, and I think almost anybody who just looks at it logically, doesn't matter what your political stripe is, you can agree that this system is very unjust to the common man.
Yeah, and there's so much confusion. Like there's a growing critique on the right that has been there for decades, but
Yeah.
it's becoming more in fashion now to criticize free market capitalism as the thing that took the right off the rails.
Right. Yeah.
So dumb. And it's like, no, materialism is a problem.
Sure.
Consumerism is a problem. That's not freedom, my friends. Okay?
Yeah.
You can have consumerism and materialism whether you have freedom or no freedom in the market. So let's not be stupid here. But what people do is on the right, particularly, they do it on the left, but this new catchy thing on the right is we have to criticize market freedom ideology, because
Yeah.
that has led us to this greed, that has led us to destruction of the small town, and that has led us to the destruction of the family. And it's like, no, that first of all, we don't have much of a free market. We have a very rigged corporatist market where the state in all of its levels, from federal to state to local, and then the multinational global organizations, do everything they can to rig the market forces to fit their preferred interests and their preferred friends. That's what we have always had for a long, long time to various degrees.
Yeah.
So it's not freedom's fault that we have a society that has abandoned the concern for the family in a society that has abandoned its concern for restraint when it comes to appetite for consumption. That's not freedom's fault. In fact, if you're going to make a case, it's actually much more closer to a state-managed society that the so-called conservatives think is the solution.
Yeah.
Because it's a state-managed society that has goosed the economy to the point where now you can't just save your money with sound money and have it appreciate over time in the bank. Now you have to gamble your savings in the stock market in a casino economy to have something like a nest egg when you retire.
Right.
Now we don't have families taking care of grandma and grandpa. Now we have a Social Security that has detached that generational connection. Now we have Medicare, which sickens grandma and grandpa on drugs that are not proven to be effective for many of the chronic illnesses that they have, which are a result of single-payer nutrition that has told us all to eat tons and tons of margarine instead of butter and grains instead of meat, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So these fools, they don't even know the beginning of it, right? These guys make me the most irritated, okay? Because these guys say, oh, we're for the family. Okay, that's great. I hope you are. Then let's get to the real reality of it.
Right.
Why'd you let the state teach grandma to eat margarine? That's why she can't breathe.
Yeah, yeah.
Where's your family conservative family concern? Come on,
Yeah.
And if you're blaming this on people who are for free markets, it has nothing to do with free markets.
Yeah.
Then they say, oh well, capitalism makes us all greedy consumerists. Wait a second, I thought that was Keynesianism. Keynesianism, which is state-managed markets, is the one that says we need to rig the economy to get us to consume all the time.
Right, right.
Yeah, that's not free markets.
Yeah, and Keynesianism, it's a good point to bring up because a lot of people sort of confuse Keynesianism with the more classical understanding of what capitalism is. I don't even personally love the word capitalism. It was a word coined by Marx, and he was sort of using it in a particular way. I just like free market enterprise.
That's what I use too. But I like voluntary, exchange. Voluntary.
Totally. Yeah.
This is not, to me, this is a matter between violence and nonviolence. And I challenge any conservative who wants to critique the free market to answer the question that Jesus says. God desires mercy, not sacrifice. What's mercy or sacrifice?
Right.
How about when Jesus says, do not resist evil with violence? Ooh, uh-oh. What? Yeah. Whoa. Is that Ayn Rand telling you to do that? Who cares about Ayn Rand? I'm not paying attention to Ayn Rand. I've never read Ayn Rand's books. I don't care about Ayn Rand. I don't care one way or the other. Okay? Right. Jesus says, do not resist evil with violence.
Absolutely.
Okay? So that means if you love your family and you love promoting a community in society where the public good is maintained for families, for grandma, for grandpa, for great-great-grandpa, and so on. If that's what your priority is, then I would do something really novel and stop disobeying Jesus when he says, don't resist evil with violence. Right. If you think having consumerism is evil, then don't employ collective violence to solve it. Right. If you think materialism is evil, then do not resist it with violence. If you think anti-family cultural values are evil, then do not resist that evil with violence.
Absolutely.
That's my message to the conservatives that are just so bedazzled in their desire to fight against China that they're increasingly looking a lot more like the communist Chinese crony capitalists over there.
Yeah, totally. And I think that's a very good way to put it. And I think, and like I was saying before, and you alluded to this too, is Keynesianism encourages consumerism. It's not free market voluntary exchange. It's a Keynesian system that keeps our interest rates artificially low, and then people take on bad loans that they shouldn't be, and they take on malinvestment and bad risk. So you get into Go ahead.
There's all this credit that 16-year-olds can have a credit card.
Right, yeah.
That's not, excuse me, Mr. Conservatives that think it's really cool.
Yeah.
to be against, it's really edgy to be against markets, okay? I know that's really cute
Yeah.
right now. Excuse me, how does a 16-year-old get a credit in a sound money system? So why
Yeah.
are you blaming people who are trying to teach the right ethics?
Right.
Because see, here's another thing that's interesting for the little conservatives that are all against markets, really edgy. You don't even know what sound money is. The Bible says there should be just weights and measures. How is it a just weight and measure of money to have an economy where a fiat currency can be debased for those who save their money and those on fixed incomes, but those who get the money first, those who have their hands closest to DC, can use that money that's printed and created in the credit system, and they can use it before it's trickled down into the rest of the economy and caused prices to increase. How
Right.
is that a just weight and measure? So
Yeah. Yeah.
how in the world can you blame that on freedom when we're the ones telling you we shouldn't have that wicked system? And then if we didn't have that wicked system, 16-year-olds would not have credit card offers in the mail. I mean, if they did, it'd be very rare. It'd be based on a lot of savings in the economy. This
Yeah.
is a Christian principle that you can't just out of nothing make stuff.
Yeah.
Okay? You have to save. And then when you save, that discipline allows you to do credit cards for 16-year-olds. But we don't have enough savings in the economy to support a real situation where people can have a credit card to buy flat screen TVs while working a minimum wage job. We don't have that.
Right.
There's no reality for that.
Yeah.
And we're on an illusion. We're on an illusion based on the state. And it's a power to destroy the economy through the debasement of morality. And the Federal Reserve's creation of money has also contributed to the destruction of the family because it destroys the incentive to save. It destroys the incentive for long-term preference, right?
Yeah.
It's got a high time preference. We got to spend now because the money's going to lose its value over time. So all this concern about the markets destroying families is actually laid completely at the feet of first and foremost fallen human beings, right?
Yeah.
But primarily exacerbated because of the presence of central banks, regulations, government-rigged trade deals, and all of the phony income taxes and occupational licensing and regulations that make it so difficult for our markets to function as the creator intended.
For sure. And yeah, those are all good things. And just as we start to land this plane here, I just want to ask you how do we as individuals imitate Jesus in a culture that is so antichrist in a way? And you don't even necessarily have to be a Christian to imitate Jesus. I think you can follow it seems like Girard kind of made a lot of room for that. Like you can follow the example of Jesus and, imitate him. But how do you think that we as individuals, because there's only so much we can do about the monopoly of the state and their monopoly on violence, but what do we do as individuals going forward?
Well, I would say that, I think it's true that to be an imitator of Jesus is to be a Christian.
Sure. Yeah.
So there's a lot of people who are in the church who may not be a Christian, and technically, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
They're not imitating Jesus. Most of it, and I would say that there's no status where, okay, now you're an imitator of Jesus, right? It's a process.
Right.
Maya Angelou used to say when people would tell her, "Oh, I'm a Christian," she'd say, "Already?" And
Yeah,
I think
yeah.
that's an important way to think about it, right?
For
So
sure.
it's a process of wanting to imitate the desires modeled for us by Jesus. But here's the funny thing. Oftentimes when you try to imitate Jesus in the true, almost literal way, people will accuse you of saying, well, you're not Jesus. How can you do that? Or
Yeah.
they'll say, you have a Christ complex or messianic complex or something.
Right.
It's like, well, maybe, obviously there's a way that's bad, but maybe we need that to be done a little bit more,
Sure.
maybe the point of the story where they're in the boat and it's storming and Jesus or Peter's walking on the water and Peter says, and they're worshiping Jesus in awe. And, but Jesus doesn't leave him in the boat. He says, Peter, get out of the boat, do what I'm doing. Be me. Right.
Yeah.
And the church today doesn't want to do that. It wants to worship Jesus from the safety of the boat.
Right.
So it wants to say, thank you, Jesus, for attacking all those religious hypocrites from your time, but we're not going to do that in our time. Thank you, Jesus, for challenging the evil of the empire through nonviolence, through the power, the proactive Aikido-like power of your nonviolent witness.
Yeah.
Thank you for doing that in your time, but we're not going to do that here in our time for Canada or
Right.
America. No, thank you. So we stay in the boat instead of getting out and being like Jesus and walking on water too.
Yeah.
So I think that's important, because I would say that the Western Christian, whether a liberal or conservative variation, tends to be more taught to think like Descartes. I think blank, therefore I am Christian, right?
Right.
I think blank, like let's say, I think the Roman Catholic Church is the universal faith, therefore I am Christian. I think it's immersion baptism, therefore I am Christian. I think John Calvin was right, therefore I am Christian. I think John Wesley was right, therefore I am Christian, right?
Right.
I think blah, 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 on and
Yeah.
on and on. Rather, it's more like Shakespeare, or another way of putting it, Shakespeare was more like the Bible. To be or not to be, it's an imitation, right?
Yeah.
It's a whole body thing. It's not I think Cartesian model. It's an imitation that is what makes us Christian. So I think that's the first thing that people need to have in mind. And then the second thing I would say is, you're absolutely right, Jordan. We shouldn't be really focused on politics. I would recommend that people use their talents and stack. Scott Adams says it nicely. You don't have to be a genius at everything, but you can have certain talents that you can learn or you have naturally, and stack them together in creative assortment so that you can solve problems in a particular area very well, right?
Yeah.
So I would say this. Let me give you an example to think about. To be a Christian is to do something like what Stanley Pons and Martin Fleischmann were trying to do. Stanley Pons and Martin Fleischmann in 1989 had discovered what they called cold fusion back then, right? This idea was that perhaps you could create nuclear energy in a laboratory environment. Perhaps you could have a tabletop device that could produce nuclear energy that could change the game. Now, they made a few mistakes. They didn't know exactly what they had stumbled onto. They had a difficult time having other people replicate their work. But because they dared to call it nuclear fusion, they stepped onto the boundaries. They were chemists, but on the pecking order of the sacrificial hierarchy of priestly knowledge, physics outrank the chemists, right? The physicists outrank the chemists on the hierarchy. And when they stepped in as chemists and said, hey, we discovered a physics phenomenon called nuclear fusion, what happened?
I don't know.
They stepped in it big. To this day, Stanley Pons he left America as an American, and now he lives in France in hiding.
Wow.
No one's ever talked to him since, because he got so railroaded by the media in 1989 when they made their announcement. And they had some legitimate problems with their stuff, but I think they stumbled onto something real. Yeah. And I think it's not fusion, right? And I would say it's not fusion. It's not cold.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm being a little flippant with the cold. It's room temperature. It's a type of nuclear reaction that other people have replicated since. But it's never received the media attention because it violated what? It violated the priestly caste hierarchy that, wait a second, if it's going to be fusion, we should see gamma ray. We should see all these different attributes that our classic understanding of fusion says is supposed to be.
Yeah.
But what I want you to understand is that classical understanding of how fusion is to be may be wrong. Right. And it may be hard for us to accept that because we don't know how religiously faithful we actually are to the institutions that we have been deemed indisputable, sacred, authoritative, and consensus, right?
Right.
So when you think like a Christian, think about that issue as one example of how to be a Christian, which is the courage to challenge the crowd and say, hey, maybe they did know that there was a way to create nuclear type energy at low temperatures in a laboratory setting. Yeah. Maybe that's possible, even though it violates the standard model of the atom as we know it. Maybe that's a place to get energy too cheap to meter, so that billions of families that live in poverty, that can't make ends meet because of all the costs of a scarcity-based energy system, maybe they could be lifted up if I use my mind and my courage to investigate things in the natural world that previously have received sacred violence when you test them out. Does that make sense? Jesus was sacrificially excluded because he violated the taboos of his institutions. And just the same, you will be shunned, you will be ostracized, like Martin Fleischmann and Stanley Pons, when you violate the sacred taboos of the institutions that dominate our society today. You may not be physically sacrificed in a crucifixion like Jesus, but you will be socially ostracized, destroyed,
Right.
vilified
Yeah.
as a kook, a nut, a freak, everything in the book to destroy you, because that's how mimetic contagion works. And it's up to people who want to be like Jesus to stare down that crowd, not to reciprocate with the same pettiness they give to us, but to serve our neighbor and to solve things right under our noses in the natural world and in the social world.
Wow. Yeah, absolutely. Amen to all of that. Well, thanks, David, for joining me. You're officially my first guest, and thanks a lot for coming on the show. And hopefully, we'll talk again sometime.
Very good. Thanks for having me.